In this section, we're going to examine changes in aggregate demand. Once again, our aggregate demand curve is a downward sloping line when graphed against the price level on the vertical axis and the amount of RGDP on the horizontal axis, reflecting that inverse relationship. Now, a change in aggregate demand would be a shift in the curve. Aggregate demand curve, for example, shifting to AD prime, reflecting that more is demanded at every price level. Now, it turns out that that's caused by any autonomous change in any one of the four components of aggregate demand. By autonomous change, we mean any change in a variable that causes a change in one of the four components other than the price level. We've already seen that the price level would cause a movement along the aggregate demand curve. Let's consider a change in the interest rate. Let's let the interest rate decrease. If that happens, then consumers can easily borrow and they will increase their amount of purchasing of interest-sensitive goods and services such as automobiles. And that would be reflected as an increase in aggregate demand. More would be demanded at every price level. So once we understand that any autonomous change in any one of the four components would cause a change in aggregate demand, we now need to look at what causes those autonomous changes. We've already talked about interest rates with respect to consumers. The second thing that might affect consumers is a change in their nominal wealth. Consider that the stock market would rise one day. The Dow Jones index rises several points. Consumers then would have more nominal wealth. They would have more in their checking accounts as a result of those higher values for the stock prices. Therefore, they would increase their demand for goods and services at every price level or an increase in aggregate demand. Another thing affecting consumer spending would be consumer confidence. If consumers are confident about the economy, if they feel like they're going to have their job in the future, not worried about losing their job, they will tend to take on more debt and increase their spending at every price level, which would be reflected by a shift, an increase in aggregate demand. Finally, for consumers, income taxes affect their ability. Income taxes, an increase in income taxes, for example, would decrease disposable income, which then would decrease consumption, which in turn would decrease aggregate demand or shift the aggregate demand curve to the left, again reflecting that less would be demanded at every price level. Business investment spending is a volatile component of aggregate demand. It's also sensitive to interest rates. If interest rates were to fall, then more projects businesses are considering would become worthwhile. They would want to expand plant and equipment, buy more capital goods, because they do that by way of borrowing. So interest rates being lower makes that kind of spending cheaper, and that would cause the aggregate demand curve to shift to the right, reflecting more demanded at each price level. Business confidence or expectations also affects business investment spending. If businesses feel confident that sales are going to be positive in the future or going to increase, they're going to want to expand their operations now, buy more plant and equipment and capital goods to prepare for those sales. That would cause the aggregate demand curve to shift to the right, again reflecting more demanded at every price level. Taxes also affect business investment spending. If corporate income taxes are raised, then there will be the after-tax profits will be lower, thus less would be available for business investment spending. The aggregate demand curve would shift to the left. On the other hand, example of an investment tax credit would cause businesses to take advantage of that tax credit and increase business investment spending at every level, thus shifting the aggregate demand curve to the right. Government spending, our third component, is really subject to the political process or worldwide conditions. And later on in the course, we're going to discuss fiscal policy and the use of taxes in government spending. But for now, an increase in government spending, say for example, to build more schools or repair bridges and improve highways would cause the aggregate demand curve to move to the right, reflecting again that there's more spending at every price level. We already talked about how taxes, government taxes, affects both business as well as consumer spending. Net export spending is affected by the foreign exchange rates and relative income levels. Let's take, for example, the foreign exchange. The Japanese yen should increase in value. Therefore, it would take less Japanese yen to buy each dollar. Our goods and services then would look cheaper to the Japanese, and they're going to buy more of our products. When they buy more of our products, exports increase at every price level, and aggregate demand curve would shift to the right to reflect that increase in foreign purchases of our goods. Or let's consider if Germany's national income were to rise faster than the domestic income or U.S. income. Then Germans would certainly buy more German products, but they would also buy more American products. Thus, exports would rise, aggregate demand curve would rise, shift to the right at every price level, reflecting that more is demanded at every price level. Now, there's another way to envision aggregate demand, and I call it the bathtub theorem. I'll draw a bathtub best I can here. It's got a spigot and a drain, and you can look at the water level in the bathtub and equate that to aggregate demand. From physics, we know that if the injections of water into the bathtub equal the leakages out of the drain, the water level is not going to change. Using that and applying it to economics to it, then the injections would be government spending, investment spending, and exports. An increase in any one of those would cause the water level to rise, aggregate demand curve to shift to the right. A decrease in any one of those would cause the level of water to fall and aggregate demand curve to shift to the left. The leakages from this bathtub are taxes, savings, and imports. If, for example, the government were to increase taxes, that would be an increase in the leakages, which would cause the level of water to decrease in the bathtub and aggregate demand curve to move to the left. Let's say consumers become more confident, as we talked about earlier. They would do more spending, they'd be comfortable spending more, therefore less savings, less of a leakage, therefore the water level would rise, aggregate demand curve would shift to the right. Nice way to think about aggregate demand. If you get stuck, you can use it. I hope you find it helpful.